Hey, welcome to Creative Block. We're your hosts, Gene.
And V, we interview people in the creative industries about their life, work, and hobbies while we doodle jam.
We ask people on Twitter if they had specific topics they wanted us to discuss, as well as some drawing prompts.
And today with us, we have Jason Demarco. Hi.
Hi.
Hey guys, thank you for having me on.
Thanks for coming on the show. You are somewhat of a legend. You are the co-founder You're the co-founder of Toonami. You were an instrumental figure in Adult Swim and William Street Records. You've done so many different things. I don't think we're going to be able to get to all of them, but we can definitely try, right? And you're also our first true blue executive. We've had some people who worked as executives and then moved into creative fields, but we want to hear about that world and what that's like. Sure. And the stuff that you've done is so creatively driven that I find it fascinating, because like Toonami was huge to me growing up, still is. I mean, you know, in Adult Swim and everything. I feel like for those who don't know, like you pretty much, I won't say single-handedly because I know there's a whole team, but you've been a central figure in shaping like an entire generation or two or more, maybe, I don't know, of of interest, and bringing in so much anime to the States and all kinds of stuff. And so yeah, it's a ton to unpack, but let's take it back. Let's take it back, you know, to where you were first starting out. At which point do you feel like you first kind of embarked on this journey that you call your career?
I think for me, I think anybody that gets a good job in media, it usually starts with opportunity. You know what I mean? And that can be someone you know, or that can be a situation you find yourself in. I was in college, and a friend of mine's friend from Atlanta named Sean Akins was coming to visit, and my friend's apartment where he was going to stay was such a disgusting pigsty.
Cool.
That he was like, I can't ask him to stay here. Can he stay at your place? Because I had a fold-out couch. And I said, yeah, sure. So we met and, liked each other. And I was close to graduating from, I went to college at Savannah College of Art and Design. I was close to graduating at that time. And I said, hey, man, when I graduate, can I come to Atlanta and hit you up for work? He, at the time, was working at TNT, Turner Network Television, making promos. And he said, call me when you graduate. So I graduated. I called him. And he was like, move to Atlanta. We'll see what happens. So I went ahead and rolled the dice, moved to Atlanta. I mean, I didn't have any other prospects. And then he got me a writing test. So at TNT. And basically, he knew he was leaving for Cartoon Network. At that time, his boss, Mike Lazo, had said, hey, come on over, work for me at Cartoon Network. So Sean knew he was leaving. So he went to his boss at TNT and said, hey, I'm leaving, but I got a hot new prospect for you. And that woman, Andrea Taylor, who's a wonderful person, was like, yeah, sure, I'll check it out. Does he have a reel? And I had like my reel of college short films or whatever. And she said, well, have him take a writing test. So I took the writing test, got in, and started working at TNT. At the same time, and then when they hired me, they were like, you're not just going to quit in 2 years and go work for Sean, are you? And I was like, no. And that's exactly what happened.
Oh, no.
I started working at TNT making promos, and I love movies, so it was a super fun job for me. It was just like making like movies for promos for like the Beastmaster and Clint Eastwood movies and the types of stuff that they showed on TNT, which I loved. But at the same time, Sean was developing. Lazo had said, "Hey, the afternoon cartoon block we have of action shows is doing terribly. We need you to come up with like a new thing, like some new packaging for it." So Sean called me down the floor below to Cartoon Network. So I would moonlight with Sean, basically brainstorming what would become Toonami. We had all kinds of ideas. For like a year, we were in development on it. And at the same time, I was working at TNT.
So what's that process like? Like, what kind of factors come into play when you're brainstorming like a media block? Like that's such a unique thing to have to try to figure out. Is there like marketing research or things like that?
No, I mean, back then it was the Wild West. This is 1996.
Right. Yeah.
So things were not as settled in the industry as they are now. So
Right.
it was really just ratings. It was like, well, we know they wanted boys, young boys at the time, to
Mm-hmm.
watch this afternoon after school block. And they were like, we know boys aren't watching it. So what can we do to draw a new audience? So we knew we wanted to do a hosted block. And for a while we were going to do a live action. It was going to be a green screen set with a live action young woman host who talked to an AI named Surge.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually got to the point where we even casting. We interviewed Selma Blair
Oh wow.
before she was famous. She was 14.
Yeah.
She was going to be our host. And then we scrapped all of it and decided, you know what, we should just do full animation CG. And Lazo at the time said, well, we own all these Hanna-Barbera characters. Why don't you just find one from the library? So we chose Moltar because he had a helmet and he didn't have a mouth. And we
Yeah.
knew we could make him nod his head.
Yeah.
And it was space
That's all
stuff.
you need.
And other than that, we were making reels and sort of cutting together vibe kind of promos of like, here's the music, here's the types of shows we would want to put in. So we would like go to the rental store, because you could rent videos back then. Go to the rental store. There was a Japanese rental store in Atlanta at the time that would have anime. It was untranslated, but they would have like Dragon Ball Z movies and stuff before you could really get that stuff in any other way. So we would rent those, literally dub the tapes, and then use those to like cut together like here's what we want this block to feel like. And then we would get skateboarding videos. So it was literally just sort of trying to help our bosses understand the vibe we were going for. And so based on all of that and the fact that we came up with the name Toonami, we had a big list of names, and Toonami was one I came up with. And Lazo said, let's call it that.
Yeah.
And they just said, okay, we'll give you a little bit of money and you can hire like 3 people and we'll see what happens. And that's kind of how it all started in 96.
Yeah.
Or 7, whenever the premiere.
Is there just a random question, but is there a reason why they specifically wanted to target younger boys?
The thinking at the time was that young boys, the thinking still is to some degree that young women don't watch cartoons
Yeah.
that the same amount that young boys do. And that was, I will say that it's very reductive, obviously, but it was somewhat proven out in audience at that time. Now you could argue, well, if all the shows are very boy centric, then why would young women watch? But generally boys also bought more toys, made their parents buy more toys. And the thinking then was young women mature faster. They grow out of stupid shit like toys and cartoons earlier than boys do. So we need to keep the boys as long as possible. And that was for like the first 5 to 10 years of Toonami. The driving force, our demos that we were supposed to be reaching were boys 9 to 14. And if we ever did anything that was too girl focused or got too much of a girl audience, it was like, oh, why are you doing that? Because at the time, Disney totally owned that audience. And it was the thinking at the network was, we can't beat them, but we can beat them with boys.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
It's all psychological like profiles. What's interesting is that they were targeting 9 to 14 because I feel like that's still not a tapped market. Like it's just now we're starting to see more and more that like young adult sort of content coming out. I hate the word content. I shouldn't have said that, but but media. But and so it feels like, to me, I mean, I was in 96. I wasn't even watching Toonami at that point. I think I finally tuned in. It was like maybe almost 2000 by the time I got cable, but I was like 11, and so I was like right in the age group you guys were.
Yeah, you were perfect in the zone.
Yeah. And so like it felt like it was so well curated for exactly the kind of thing that an 11-year-old boy in the year 2000 was into.
I mean, psychologically, the thing we always said was we wanted Tom, the host, to seem like your cool older brother who was bringing you the cool stuff, like the cool music, the cool video games, the cool interviews with people that have cool jobs that you might want to grow up and do one day, and then obviously the cool cartoons. That was the goal.
Yeah,
and still kind of is, except now we're talking to adults.
Sure. Well, now all those kids have.
Now it's your cool pal. It's your cool friend.
It's your cool buddy.
It's a cool friend.
It's your cool buddy. That's like, hey, have you seen this like new underground hip hop thing?
Or your less cool uncle now, for those of you people that have been watching it for 25 years.
I mean, that's gotta.
That's what I was gonna ask. Is like you're basically making now the content for the same kids that you were, like the kids who grow up, right? The same audience that you were making the content for. That's kind of cool. That's really cool.
I would say our country is kind of, especially now, you go through a generation like every 5 years.
Yeah.
So it's like 5 generations, micro generations, of audience. So it's pretty crazy, because at this point we still have people finding us every day that have never watched Toonami before, and then we also have people that have been watching since we came back to Adult Swim and never heard of it before that. And for them, that's a long time, because that's 2012. You could call yourself a long time viewer if you've been watching something for a decade. That's a long time.
Yeah.
And that is not even close to the people that have been watching since day one, which we still have a decent number of people that have been watching since 1996.
Yeah, that's wild.
Pretty bananas. Yeah.
Do you guys ever think about like how the current viewership could potentially bring in like their kids, and is it something that you guys are thinking about in terms of like maybe now like it's dad and his kids watching the programming, or is it just like no, just like only for
No, we hear. I mean, we don't. It's since it's on Adult Swim, we're never going to worry about like trying to find kid content. But anecdotally, when I've been to conventions many times, I've been told by people, I grew up and used to watch it, and now I watch it with my son or my daughter, or like, my brother watched it when he was younger, and now I watch it. I used to watch it with him when I was too little to even know what it was. Now we watch it together, and I'm in college and he's a grown up, but when we get back together at home, we watch it. And you hear stories like that which are, I mean, obviously that's wonderful when people say stuff like that.
Yeah. You mentioned the micro generations thing. I find that really interesting, because I don't think I've ever heard anybody really talk about that. And I feel like probably from an exec world, like you have to be aware of those things. And I guess my question is like, how much of a conscious effort is it to keep track of these shifts in psychology and trends, or is it just kind of something you feel like you are like absorbing through, osmosis, being online?
I will say that since so much of Toonami is the point of view of a group of people that work on it, and really it does come from our hearts and souls a lot. So, we pick shows we like. Like, we don't do anything because the network mandates it, because the network has always been, at least especially in the Adult Swim era, they've let us do what we wanted as long as we didn't go bananas spending money. That's pretty much the Adult Swim method. Is here's a tiny bit of money. You can do what you want, but if you ask for more money, it'll be a little harder for you to do exactly what you want. So, we're largely given free reign to pick the shows we like, to make the kinds of things we want to make, to redesign Tom whenever we want, like within our budget. It's completely under our control. So it all comes from us. And then when things change in the culture, it's like you kind of have to stay on top of things somewhat. You can't not be on social media at all. You can't not be plugged into trends in anime, trends in music, because then you start to feel, the block starts to feel old because you're old, it's sort of hard. So excuse me. I will use Attack on Titan as an example. We premiered Attack on Titan in like 2013 or whenever it first came out. And we were so excited about it because the idea was so cool, and we had seen the first couple episodes, and I wanted to make this horrifying trailer that was like a horror movie, right?
Yeah.
And I really focused on the fact that these are giant people eating humans. And at the time, we were still working in that style of trailer where we had the voice of God and stuff, but largely the culture had kind of moved on from the voice of God in trailers. So we cut this big voice of God trailer for Attack on Titan and released it, and it was an eye-opener for me, because tons of people commented like, what is this stupid shit? This sounds like a trailer from 1970. Like, there was a whole generation of anime fans who had never seen Toonami, who had gotten their anime straight from the source, Funimation or Crunchyroll or whatever, watched it only subtitled, that whole generation, and loved Japanese style trailers. And when they saw this, they were like, not only did it not feel like one of the trailers from Japan, it also didn't feel like a movie trailer, because movie trailers don't have voiceover anymore. So there were a lot of comments on like, this is so sad and old school.
That's so mean.
Oh my gosh.
People are harsh, and I mean, certainly when you put anything out on the internet, you're going to get negative response. So I didn't take it to heart, but I did say, you know what? They're right, though. Nobody uses the voice of God anymore. And if we want to keep up with the times, we need to start cutting our trailers the way movie trailers are cut. They need to just be sound bites from the show with cool music. That's it. Like, we have to move with the times. And I remember that was a key one for like the current version of Toonami, was just like, oh, right, this music. Or like when we stopped using drum and bass, because drum and bass kind of fell out of favor, and it was harder to get good drum and bass. And it was like, well, obviously society's moved on from drum and bass. So that kind of stuff, you just have to pay attention to that stuff. I like all these drawings.
That's V. V just goes off like a rocket. It's amazing.
I like Tom eating cereal is the one person's suggestion.
Yes, it's good. Yeah, a fruit salad. It was Tom eating a fruit salad.
Yeah. He would never eat a fruit salad though. But yeah.
Oh God, man, I should not have. I'm not being faithful to the character.
He despises fruit.
Yeah.
He despises fruit. That's probably where the problem.
He doesn't eat anyway, but fruit would definitely, if he did eat, he wouldn't eat fruit.
Yeah. Speaking of Tom, I think that something that was really like, impressive to me at the time was when you guys did those big crossover events where like suddenly now, things are going wrong with the Absolution, and like you have to go and play this Flash game, and like it was such a brilliant way to like cross those two streams. Like the internet was still like pretty fresh. And what was the conception of that, and what brought that to fruition?
Transmedia before Transmedia. So it came up because we knew we wanted to. So at the time, Clay Croker was the voice of Moltar, and Clay was great, but Clay had a full-time gig as Moltar on Space Ghost Coast to Coast, and he kind of wasn't really into doing Toonami. Like, he's a nice guy and we got along great, but when you got him in the booth, he was really not into like making the extra effort. So when we would talk about skate videos, or like the little, we call them homilies, the little Tom things where he talks about anger, or,
those are great.
He would be like not into reading those. And so we just got to a point where we were like, maybe we should think about making our own character and our own mythos, and just like, and that's the other thing, is we would get comments from Lazo about how Moltar looked, or the Space Ghost planet looked, or, and we were like, you know what, we just need to do our own thing. So we recast Tom as the voice of Sonny Strait Krillin from the US dub of Dragon Ball Z. And when we knew when we built Tom that he was really cool looking, but he had these backwards knees. If you remember the original little Potbelly Tom, had backwards knees, and it was a cool design thing. But we always were never like, we argued with the design team like, that's not practical, and they were like, but it looks cool. And eventually they just got tired of animating these weird backward knees, and they were like, well, we got to make a new Tom. And I was like, okay, why don't we make a thing out of it instead of just doing it like every other block does? You just refresh and don't talk about why. Let's turn it into a story where like, let's kill this guy, and let's bring back let's give him a new aged up body, and he's like aging up with the audience. And they bought my idea and thought, hey, that's a cool idea. So we plotted it out. It was going to cost tons of, it was like $1 million, which back then was crazy.
Yeah.
And they said, well, if we can give you that money if you get a sponsor, but you got to have something else for people to do. So we said, well, what about like a Flash game, And so we came up with this Flash game and hired this company to do it. And so really it was all because we were going to do it anyway, but it was going to cost a ton of money. Lazo was not happy about that much money being spent on what he called stupid fucking packaging. And I used his direct quote. And he was like, no one's watching the damn show because of the stupid fucking packaging. They're watching because of the shows, man. And we were like, no, it's both.
It's both.
But, we had that argument with him for 20 years straight. he always gave us money. He always hooked us up, but then he always was like, "Don't get ahead of yourself. You're not that great." So,
What a good
so,
attitude.
so he was like, "If you can get a sponsor, man, sure." And that you guys probably don't remember this, but the sponsor was Six Flags. It was like, and we had a whole contest where we took the winner to 6 different Six Flags
Mm-hmm.
across the country, and there was a T-shirt giveaway and all this stuff. But that's how it all started. Was we knew we were going to blow this money, and the network was like, "You need to figure out a way to defray that cost." So we just came up with other stuff that people could do,
Yeah.
and then that did so well. The client was happy, everybody was happy, that we decided to do it again the next year when we refreshed again. And then we had Lockdown, which had an even more elaborate game, and then a bigger, and we did it for a couple years before eventually, like in any kind of TV sales thing, it's always trends, and eventually, we ran out of gas. We couldn't go back with the same thing to the same clients, and so we just decided, let's just put it to bed for a while.
Sure.
Mm.
Yeah. I'm going to pepper in some questions from Twitter because we had a lot of good stuff.
Please.
From at Casey Williams, you helped bring anime into the mainstream for so many millennials, and most of us saw anime for the first time on Toonami. But how did you first discover / get into anime?
Oh, yeah, I first started getting into anime when I was very young, when I was like, let's say 6 years old. I lived in upstate New York. That's where I was born and raised, Albany, Schenectady area. Um, and at the time, in cable at the time, in certain markets, they would show two different things. They would show Force 5, which was 5 different shows, one every day of the week, and it was like Space Cateers, Brave Radine, Guy King. So it was like it was giant robot shows for the most part. And then after that, they started showing Star Blazers, and really it was Star Blazers, and then they showed Robotech. It was really Star Blazers and Robotech where I was a kid. I had to get up at 5 in the morning to watch them. I would get up, watch my shows, get ready for school, and go to school. And I was so early that no one in my house was up, so I was allowed to just go downstairs and have the TV to myself.
Such a golden
So I
moment.
remember, I know, I remember the year that I watched Star Blazers, and it blew my mind because I was like, this is a cartoon, but people are dying, and they're having
Yeah.
like real relationships, and they're falling in love, and they're having adult feeling arguments, and there's all these cool spaceships. And like, to me, it just felt like a whole other world from the cartoons I had been watching, which I still love, but like so different from Tom and Jerry, like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So then Robotech was sort of more of the same. And from that point on, I just tried to find anime wherever I could, which in those days was you go to the video store or you go to a convention and try to find fan bootlegs of like, subtitles. So it would just be and then after that, it became go to the video store, look at the box art, get whatever, rent whatever's there. So
this looks cool.
Yeah, that's how you get like Ninja Scroll and like, all kinds of cool stuff like that. And then Akira, obviously. So that's how I became an anime fan, was through exposure to television broadcasts. And then at the time, you really had to be dedicated if you wanted to be an anime fan. Anime fans today have it way easier.
Oh, yeah.
Which is why those of us from my era have no patience for gatekeeping, because we're like, fuck you. I grew up in a time where you had to really go out of your way to find anything, or even to find information on anything, on what was coming, who an artist was, who let alone like who an animator was. Now people do these Sakuga blogs. Back then you couldn't find any of that stuff.
Luck.
You had to buy every anime magazine, which were mostly by fans and didn't have a lot of real actual information. There was no scholarly anything written about anime back then. So like, when people now are like, I hate normies being into JoJo, or like, anyone who watches the dub is lame, is like, I have just no patience for it. None.
Yeah, gatekeeping's always bullshit. And it's like, if you are that bothered by it, like, why were you into it? Were you into it just to be different, or were you actually into it? Like, it just feels like this weird club that people create.
It turns into a fetishization of Japanese culture, which I think is when it gets gross. And anime, believe me, I've met enough anime creators and worked with enough of them to know that they do not give a shit about otaku or weebs or what they think.
Yeah.
They're just like, those nerds, they don't care at all. That's not why they work.
Right.
They don't work for the approval of strangers on the internet.
Yeah, no, none of us should.
Yeah, I mean, more power to them.
Casey also had a follow-up question. How did you discover the god tier combo that is anime and underground hip hop?
I mean, that was sort of obvious for us, even though it doesn't feel like it would be, but it seemed like it to us. It was when we were developing Toonami, we were like, we looked around and every single kids block, and even now today, it's 25 years later, so many kids blocks are just like screaming guitars, like,
Yeah.
and the announcer going like, tonight on another hey kids.
Yeah.
It's like it just felt all like talking down to kids. It felt like somebody who's lazy, doesn't really like what they're talking about, doesn't really give a shit about the cartoon that they're selling you, and just wants you to just do the thing that they need you to do, but they don't actually give a shit about you or even that what they're doing. And so for us, we were like, we wanted to come at it from the point of view of, this shit is cool. These cartoons are cool. We're going to put music we think is cool with it. We're going to talk about things we think are cool. Our whole thing is we genuinely like this stuff and hope you will too. That was it. That was the mission. So at the time, most of the music in our group, most of what we listened to was heavy metal, which we didn't want to use for Toonami, at least not at the beginning, hip hop, and electronic music. And if you're listening to electronic music, pacing wise, drum and bass makes a lot of sense to cut promos to.
Yeah.
So that's why we started in that wheelhouse. We were just fans of hip hop. And we knew nobody was using hip hop on kid stuff because hip hop was still scary to a lot of old studio executives. Lazo was crazy enough that he was like, yeah, fuck it, whatever. And, we wanted to originally use like library music, but at the time there wasn't even hip hop library music, like cheap tracks you could use. So we had to start going out to original artists. And that's how the whole music thing got started, was because we would reaching out to different artists to create beats for us for Toonami. So it was a lot of work to be able to bring in hip hop because we essentially had to just make it happen ourselves. But it just felt natural to us. It felt like anime is cool as hell, cartoons are cool as hell, they should be with super cool music that isn't stuff that sounds like an old dad in a garage. Not that there's anything wrong with old dads in garages, but
How did you find all these artists at the time? Because there wasn't the internet. Now it's kind of easy. You go to SoundCloud or Twitter or whatever, but you couldn't do that at the time, right?
No, at the time I was and am and remain a music obsessive. I probably buy 5 to 10 albums every week even now. And nice. I write down everything I listen to, and at the end of the year I make a big long list of all my favorite things. Like it's just something, it's part of who I am. So I would go to the music store a couple times a week and just thumb through albums and CDs, talk to music the people that worked in the music store, and just like read magazines, like however I could find out about new artists. So that's kind of how we found people. We would just buy music, listen to CDs, and be like, oh, cool. And then look at the back of the CD and to see if they had an email address or a way to contact them, and then reach out. Yeah. It was very analog.
Well, nice. Atlanta's such a like hotbed of hip hop too, that it probably was easy to like, man, I don't know about easy, but at least there was like so much to pull from.
Yeah, I mean, Danger Mouse, who was one of the people we first started working with, he was a DJ in Athens, and I found him through just his CDs and then reached out, and that's how he started doing beats. So yeah, that's certainly, that Atlanta thing certainly helped. And but we reached out to artists like drum and bass artists like DJ Remark and all kinds of other people across the globe who had never even heard of Toonami. They just knew some American network wants to put their music on, so they were like, oh sure, whatever.
Sure. Yeah, I mean,
$500, sure.
Yeah,
I'll do it.
Definitely. From at Cash, what have been some of your most enjoyable experiences on each of the original Toonami productions that you've worked on?
I mean, for me, definitely the first Intruder event where we killed Tom. That was fun to work on. I learned so much about storytelling. I mean, that was the first time I wrote The Intruder, and that was the first time I wrote a narrative.
That's cool.
And seeing it come to life and working on, and I learned a lot about CG, and like it was very fun learning experience and very stressful. And then IGPX, our first original series, I was heavily involved in all aspects of that show, and that was one of the most creatively fulfilling things I think I've ever worked on, because I was writing, I was helping pick music, I was sitting in the editing room, I was talking to the creator, and we were coming up with ideas about, teams and names and everything else, and then I helped direct the voice actors. So like from soup to nuts, I was pretty heavily involved. And then for the reboot of Toonami, definitely the day we did the April Fool's stunt, because that was just amazing to watch the internet,
Yeah.
have this big outpouring of love and affection, which was really fun.
Yeah.
And then, what I'm doing now, honestly, working on original shows and movies, which is just, it's, as anyone who does this will tell you, it's one of the more creatively fulfilling things you can do.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
That's when I feel the happiest, when I'm creatively fulfilled, or when I'm helping others to do the same thing. One of the greatest joys of my job at Adult Swim for so many years, running a department, was I had the money and wherewithal to say, hey, let's work with this animator and have them do a little fun short. Let's call this artist and have them do some music for Adult Swim singles. Let's, and I've heard anecdotally from so many of those artists, the visual ones and the musicians, that like that little bit of money or that little bit of support or that little bit of recognition they got really helped them, and that's what I like to hear, is being able to say, because that's what this whole project of Toonami is. It's trying to bring people's attention to amazing art and artists so that they can engage with it. It's really, to me, the greatest joy about the whole job. And one of the things I love the most is when someone like Flying Lotus or Clams Casino or somebody comes and says to me, like, hey, I was like not doing great. I was in a pretty low place, and that money helped me get over the hump. And I've heard that from a lot of artists whose work I really respect. So to know that I was able to be there for them in a moment where they really needed that help, and then they were able to achieve what they achieved, just even being a small part of their journey, means that like what we did was a net positive for me. That's kind of how I look at art. And I look at art as a positive force in the world, one of the few things that can be a positive force in the world. And to the degree that my career has been about anything, it's been about trying to bring attention to amazing art and artists, because I'm an executive. I have a paycheck I get every week. If my shows fail, eventually I'll get fired or whatever, but I'm going to work again. And I am not a musician or a painter or an animator who literally lives and dies by what they're doing at that moment and risks everything for that. I'm not that person. I'm better at putting together projects and supporting those people. I am a creative person too, but I haven't staked it all the way they have. And I think it's an incredibly brave thing to do, especially in this day and age, which is so harsh and so capitalist and so anti artists. Like, art is not considered a real job, when we all know, anyone who does it for a living knows it's a fucking real job.
But I feel like that's always been considered that way. Or do you feel like this has changed over the couple like decades that you've been doing this?
No, it's always been that way. You're right. I think it's gotten a little more industrialized, obviously. What's sad is that we've evolved as a species. We know so much more about everything, and yet there are some attitudes and some things that don't evolve with us like they should. And we should all recognize that everyone needs to be creative in some way. Every single person on earth, you can't say because someone's an accountant they're not creative. They're just not creative at that job, or they might be a creative accountant, whatever. We all have access to creativity in some form, because it's as necessary to being human as breathing.
Totally.
So I just feel like,
it's a version of just being able to problem solve, and that's ultimately what it comes down to. And like I've always said that creativity is a muscle. Like it's not this magical thing that you just have and you just like are
no, it's hard work
born with.
is what it is.
You got to work and you got to do research and train for
but that's the thing, we are not given time to work on our creativity, because if it doesn't directly give you money right away, our society is like, why are you wasting your time with that?
Hurry up and get that.
So I'm
job.
lucky. I'm very privileged to be in, and most executives are, they just don't recognize it because most executives are assholes, which is just, I'm very privileged to be in this position where I can bet on people and take risks with them, but I'm getting a paycheck every week, and I'm getting health care, and my family's taken care of, so I try to never forget that. I never lose sight of that, because I think it's one of the things that if more people did, there would be less asshole executives.
Do you
less cliche executives,
well, I was gonna ask, like, do you wish that there were more people that are like artists and more traditional creatives that had an interest in getting into that sort of executive work and kind of going over to that side?
It's hard. It's hard work to do. It's often not rewarding. It also requires a skill set of being able to disseminate information, being able to know when to pick and choose your battles. You have to have really good people skills and know how to get along with all kinds of people, and how to pitch people and how to not pitch people when the mood isn't there. You have to have a good sense of how things are going on the ground. It's not for everyone. It's very hard. And frankly, I will say there are actually a lot of people like me in the entertainment industry. They're the people getting a lot of these movies that people like The Green Knight or whatever, made. It takes someone like me at those places to get those projects done, because it's not the person at the top. And it's not the person at the bottom, because they don't have any power. There is always a producer behind every great film in the world. There was a producer solving problems, fighting stupid people, getting money, scrambling, supporting the artist, arguing with the artist when they were doing the wrong thing, or sometimes when they're doing the right thing. But like, they just aren't. Everybody's more excited about the front of the line talent for obvious reasons, and the director for obvious reasons. But there are tons of people like me out there doing good work. This job, the best thing about this job is you're kind of in the shadows.
Sure.
When you talk,
right? Most people that are in this job are.
When you talk about the people skills that you need, like as an executive, to keep like pitching and convincing and like reading the room and all that, is this something that you feel like you learned a little bit in college? Is it something that you feel you were just kind of know how to feel people? Like, what's your take on that?
I was raised in a abusive household, so I had to have my antenna up for any change in the atmosphere. You know what I mean? And I also had to know when to just like keep my mouth shut, stay out of things. So like, I was raised with a high degree of emotional intelligence because it was a survival mechanism. And it just so happens I ended up in a field where that exact skill set became something that I could use to my advantage, because not everybody had that level of emotional intelligence and maybe intuition about something. You know what I mean?
Yep.
That's amazing.
So I think it's just a matter of, I was like built in a lab to do this exact thing. You know what I mean?
Well, that's everything you've said. It's like it sounds like you just kind of, initially kind of fell into this just through circumstance, but it's like everything that you're interested in has all become such a crucial part of what your job is and why you're good at it. Because it's like you mentioned the albums and, that you're interested in music, and it's just, it's crazy to me that like how these kinds of things happen, because
for sure
you might have not fallen into this, like that, none of these things might have
for
existed.
Sure, yeah,
and,
totally.
And like I see your role as a curator. It's almost like an art gallery owner, somebody that is like finding, like you've said, like giving opportunities to artists and collecting these works of art in a way that's presentable and like marketable. And, that's so important. Like that's so important. And we also talked to Phil Rendo about similar things, because that's a lot of what he's been doing. And I just wish there were more people I personally wish there were more people who would see the potential they have in themselves to help others and
For sure.
move into
For
those
sure.
kinds of roles, because it's like,
I mean,
yeah,
it's easily the most fulfilling thing about my whole life, about my job. I mean, when I've had people tell me at cons like, "Hey, Toonami really was there for me during a really dark time of my life. I would have killed myself if I
yeah,
hadn't seen that Tom thing about not giving
yeah,
up, or
yeah, yeah,
things like that. You never even contemplate that your work will have that effect. But that kind of stuff allows me the freedom to know, like, no matter what happens in my career, if I quit tomorrow, if I die tomorrow, whatever, I've done good things for some people, and that's all
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted to do on earth. So like I've done it. I'm going to keep doing it, but like I've done the thing that was most important to me to do with my
that's awesome.
time and energy and my what I'm given.
Yeah,
And so, the other thing is you have to have people like Lazo or Sean Akins who take bets on you and give you the freedom to do some of these things that aren't the things that everyone else is doing, so that you can find the way towards your best work, your best self.
Mm-hmm.
And the great beauty of being able to work at one place for 25 years, which nobody gets to do anymore, is I was given the time and the runway to figure out and build relationships with like-minded people to create a network where we could create all this wonderful stuff. That takes time. Most people now leave their job after 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes much harder to be able to have a stable environment where you can kind of grow things literally like a greenhouse, and that's what Adult
interesting.
Swim was for its whole time of its existence so far.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I can say, like, just from personal experience, like the work that you and your team put in, it's like so formative. It's such a distillation of like all the things that, I don't know, I thought were cool, but I think I like learned that they were cool. It's like I learned all these things through Toonami and then Adult Swim and the underground hip hop. The big three for me is like Toonami, Linkin Park, and I don't know what else, but like it was like that vibe, that really cool
Right.
early 2000s vibe. And we have a question here from Mike and Murdoch. You've been responsible for so much programming that inspired a generation of kids to become creators. What show or series are you most proud to have brought to the masses, and why?
I mean, of what I'm most proud of, I'm proud of the shows that are originals that I made. But beyond that, obviously Dragon Ball Z is got to
sure.
be one of them. I mean, look, a lot of people have said too, like, well, that show would have blown up anyway. Maybe it would have. I don't know. But I do know that at the time where we started showing it, it was airing in scattered markets, certain cable areas. It was airing all messed up, and it had not caught on for a couple years, which is why we were able to get it in the first place, because it was more reasonably priced. And I know that once we got it and started making a big deal out of how great it was, literally calling it the greatest action cartoon ever made over and over, that it blew up. And that alone, Dragon Ball's arrival and blowing up in the US is a seismic event in anime fandom that we were a key part of. So I gotta say Dragon Ball is probably the one. Dragon Ball and Naruto to a lesser degree. I think Naruto really would have maybe blown up completely without us, but we helped it a lot, which is why it was so ironic. After Toonami was canceled, people were like, Naruto killed Toonami, and I'm like, no guys, Naruto was the only reason we were on for like the last 2 years of our first run, because we had Naruto. It wasn't Naruto that killed Toonami. It was executive whim that killed Toonami.
Does it bother you that when like you see that sort of feedback online from people that have no clue how things actually happen? Is it easy to shrug off, or does it get under your skin?
I would say it took me a long time to learn the skill, but I learned that nobody knows anything.
Yeah.
Everybody talks like they do know something. And sometimes I've literally had people tell me, well, that's not what that is. And I'm like, yeah, it is. I was there. I did it. I made it. And they're like, no, that's not how I remember it.
Trying to
gaslight you. I'm like, you don't remember it because the brain plays tricks on you, and you were a child. I was an adult. I'm an adult now. I learned that to some degree, there's no point The only time that it really bothers me is when people assign ill intent. Like, we purposefully tanked a show, or we purposefully lied about, like, people when they say we lie about things, I'm always like, dude, I don't have any reason to lie, and we don't lie to our audience, and we never have, and we never will. And it's a line we would never cross, because we don't get paid to work on Toonami. We get paid for other stuff we do on our job. Like Toonami, we started doing in 2012. They didn't give us any extra money. Hey, you're going to now do this thing that requires you to work very hard every single week. And they haven't made it part of like what we get for our bonus or our goals or anything else. They're just like, here's a budget for you to use for Toonami, not to put in your pocket, but to make shit. Yeah. And that's how it's been since day one. So like, since the Adult Swim one, you know, for the Cartoon Network version, we got salaries for working on Toonami.
Sure.
So
I just love the idea of somebody saying, no, I don't think that's how it happened.
People do that all the time.
You're wrong.
Or they tell me I'm wrong about like why a show did or didn't do well, or that it did or didn't do well. No, it didn't do well. I'm like, what?
That's just animation fans.
The network the network that aired it told me that it did well, and they want more. I don't know what to tell you. Yeah. For me, that's all I need to hear to know I'm good.
It's kind of funny too. I don't know what I think about it. It's just like it's so absurd, you know, like the absurdity is just funny. It's just
coronavirus kind of just shows you what I already was putting up with, which is people believe what they want to believe.
Their own reality.
Yeah, they construct their own reality.
Yeah.
It's frustrating, but yeah, the deeper I get into the industry, the more it's frustrating. The rift between like what we all have to deal with and what people think we deal with, or how how all this works, and it's just like, oh god, if you only knew, like if you only knew how hard.
Everyone's assumption of why something happens on a project is almost always wrong. If you're not actually in it.
The speculation is silly.
It's crazy.
From @Jodero6, who was the creative genius who came up with the individual Toonami intros, and how did those brainstorming sessions go? They were so creative and hyped, like DBZ, Tenchi Muyo, Gundam Wing, etc. And I agree, those were sick as hell.
Those were done as a result of the fact that anime opens were 2 minutes long.
Yeah, interesting.
And we didn't have the time to not cut them out because we had commercials we had to put in there. And commercial time in Japan, the average half-hour show in Japan is 24 and a half minutes of content. The average half-hour show in the US on broadcast television is 22 minutes of actual show. So there's 2 minutes of extra, 2.5 extra minutes in every broadcast of any Japanese show. So they were like, you got to cut something. We didn't want to cut the actual show. So it was like, okay, let's cut the ending and make it faster, and let's cut the open. And this was before the rise of the internet, where the anime open became a thing that anime fans love to, obsess over. And there were multiple opens for multiple shows and new premieres of new songs and all that. So at the time it was like, well, we need an open for the shows. Okay, we'll cut a quick little 15-second thing. And that's why those were born. And those were all our editors just taking the music and taking the show and just chopping them up into what they thought would be cool little montages.
They were great. They captured the feel so well of what you're about to watch, and it's just like, and they're all burned into my memory so distinctly. They're like Krillin's like, everyone get down, like it's like I can never unhear that exact line read.
Those were all editors just having favorite moments from the show as they clip them and just put them together. We have some really great editors.
Yeah. No, you definitely did. This next question's a little loaded, so you don't have to answer it if you don't want to. But you make a lot of posts about funding the production of more anime, despite there being a rampant overproduction problem in Japan, causing delays and even workplace injuries. What steps, if any, are you taking to alleviate these issues in your productions? And then they say, to clarify, what steps are you taking to ensure that everyone involved in your productions is being given enough time and resources to perform their best work without causing schedule issues, and especially undue mental or physical harm to themselves or other people? So it's a big question.
I mean, I think it's a legitimate question that anime fans are finally getting wise to, which is that
it's good. It's a good thing. Yeah.
I mean, the anime industry, look, anime is cheaper for a reason, because they don't pay their labor.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And anime is done faster for a reason. They force crunch on people. And this is part of that industry and has been. And the overproduction, I hesitate to call it overproduction because it's not overproduction. It's literally a saturation of production because there's only so many bodies that you can have to make a show. Like at a certain point, there can't be any more shows until more people learn how to draw. So it's really more that there's so much money out there that studios are trying to, if you see a studio greenlighting too many shows, they're probably stretching their people too thin. As people who bring the money to those studios, the things we do is basically say, look, we want you to take the time you need to do this right. So give us a realistic timeline. Don't just tell us, you know, we can work it out by X when knowing you're going to have to kill your team to get it there. You know what I mean? And also making sure they're giving us a realistic budget. If they give us a bid that's so low, it's like, well, how the hell are you going to pay people to do that? You know, that's really all you can do as an outsider. You can't force, like, I can't go to MAPPA and force them to behave differently than they choose to behave. I can not give them my business, or I could, you know, but I use Uzumaki as a good example. Uzumaki is still not done. It's been 4 years. It's 4 episodes of television. It was a low budget show, but we also said, take whatever time you need. So like, you know, we can't always say that, but we can definitely say to them in good faith, if you tell us this show is going to take 4 years to make, as long as it looks amazing and is a great show, we will realistically put that down, and that's when the show comes out. They set the timeline, not us.
That's great.
I don't go to a studio and say, I need this show in 2 years, and they say, well, 2 years, I mean, geez, we're gonna have to, you know, really kill ourselves to get that, and go, well, take it or leave it. That's just not how when you go to a studio, you go to them and say, who do you think who makes sense for this project? How can we work together on this? How much money do you think it needs to cost to be good? And how long do you need to do it? And they come back to us and say, here's what we need. And we try to meet in the middle. Certainly there are going to be some shows where for some reason, through mismanagement or through unrealistic timelines set at the beginning, that doesn't happen. But again, all you can really do is sort of try to keep them to reasonable deadlines and reasonable budgets, which if you work in the industry long enough, you know what a reasonable budget for a half-hour anime show is, and you know what one isn't. And so, you know, it's like Netflix, people get mad at Netflix for that, and Netflix pays really fucking well, like way more than we can afford. They overpay for everything. And that's actually part of the problem, because that gold rush makes greedy studio owners or greedy publishers or, you know, whoever say, oh God, we're just going to take the job. Well, we don't have enough people. We'll worry about it later. We'll hire more people if we need them. We'll send it to, you know, we'll send it to the Philippines. We'll send it to China at the end, you know, which happens a ton.
Yeah.
But that's actually individual greed. And I'm not trying to put the blame back on the industry itself. I'm just saying it's endemic to the industry itself. And so if you want major reform on that level, it has to come from the Japanese government, who only recently started forcing anime studios to pay overtime.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
So like, you know, I heard a studio person being like, oh, well, now we got to pay overtime when people stay all night. Like, well, yeah, that's kind of
what a burden.
Like you should do it, you know. But like, and again, it's just, I think it's just way more complicated than most people understand. And certainly if you're not in the industry and you're not even a person who lives in the country, you don't really know. You're just basing it on what you know about labor practices, which of course makes sense, but it's just a whole nother ball of wax societally as well. Yeah. You know, because Japanese don't complain about things to their bosses.
No.
They don't have the American workplace culture of, I'm not happy, I want to strike, or I'm not happy, I'm going to complain to my boss, or let's put pressure on our bosses to. They don't do that. They just don't. And that affects their work expectations. So it's like, it's just a really knotty issue. But like I said, what I do is what I can do. I try to meet them where they're at, take them at their word. And there are plenty of shows. In fact, I'm doing one right now where I was told it's a 4-year turnaround. Okay. I will go back and tell my bosses, we're going to spend this money and you're not going to see any result for 4 years.
Right. Yeah.
And that's not an easy sell, but it is what it is. You can't force people to do something they physically can't do.
Yeah, and it takes
Yeah.
time to make good things. I
It's
like
still made by hand, you know. It's still human labor. You just can't make it go faster than it can go.
That's one of those things that where people have a misconception again of like, I actually think South Park ruined that for a lot of things where it's like,
For sure,
you know,
for
it's
sure.
like, oh, they made this in a week. Like every show is made in a week. It's like, oh boy, are you wrong?
Yeah, for sure. Non-animation executives, even to this day, think animation is some easy, quickie thing because it's cheaper. Live action is so much more expensive. They assume because animation's cheaper, that means it's easier. It's not easier. In fact, it's harder in many ways, but it is cheaper I mean, the average anime half hour is 10% of what an average live action American half hour of television costs. It's probably less than half of what the average half hour of American animation costs. So it's going to lead the wrong person who doesn't know anything about it to be like, well, this shit's easy. That's why it's so cheap.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's cheap because it's literally all just inside of a monitor, you know, like it's literally just human labor. It shouldn't be that cheap, but it is.
Yeah.
So anyway, that it's like I said, I could talk about that for hours. It's a valid issue that I think anime fans, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, has become a big talking point, you know, among fandom and among sites like Anime News Network, because it's like, you know, you see people overworked.
And there's like access to information now, like with the internet. There's a lot of Japanese animation artists on Twitter. So you just need to, like, I mean, if you speak Japanese, you can find more information than you could before. It's like more available.
Oh yeah, I've seen artists on certain shows complaining they didn't have enough time or they didn't have enough, you know, like, and that's probably their way of trying to pressure their, you know, their studio to like kind of get control of things a little bit better and you know, pay people what they deserve and give them more time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's also in like, there is a culture of like pride in the work. Like I was watching that series Manben about mangaka artists and showing their process, and their days are they're extremely long. I don't think people in the West work that hours that are nearly as long.
No.
Yeah.
We're our society, we work way too much. Nowhere near as like Europe, I think, has the right idea.
Yeah.
You know, but Japan is even more. You are your job, and you are going to do your thing over and over and over as long as it takes until you get great at it, and that dedication is what's expected of you. And your dedication to work is what's expected of you, which is why people die at their desks in Japan all the time. If I grew up in Japan, I'd be dead right now. I'd be keeled over on a desk. I would have worked myself to death. I almost do it now. But if I lived there, part of that culture, I guarantee I would be a casualty of that. But that's why that at the same time, that's what makes it so easy to overwork people in that industry, because the work ethic is like, well, you know, I'll never forget the first time I toured an animation studio. I don't even remember what studio it was, but there were people sleeping on the floor in sleeping bags under their desk and eating like ramen from the machine. And I remember being like, what is going on? And they were like, oh yeah, they have to turn in an episode on Monday, so they're just rendering. I was just like, what? That sucks. Like,
it's like that episode of it's not Perfect Blue. What's the episode from Satoshi Kon where they actually show production? It's an episode about animation production in Japan.
Yeah, it might have been Paranoia Agent. Or...
Yes, Paranoia Agent. Yeah. This is such a great episode. Really crazy.
Yeah, I mean, but that was a real. I'll never forget. That was very shocking to me as an American. I was like, they're sleeping there. He was like sleeping next to a bank of like hard drives. You know, like I was just like, oh.
Yeah, I remember at a job I had here in mobile games, there was like one guy who slept at the studio for the night, and everyone showed up and was like, "What are you doing here?" And he's like, "Oh, I like slept here because I just like had to get all this work done." We were like, don't do that again. Like it was like such an aggressive, like, don't ever do that again. That is like not what we expect from you. And I mean, there's definitely places that still probably wouldn't discourage that, unfortunately, even in America, but it's nice that there's at least that, like, please,
for sure,
don't do that.
We used to, I mean, that happened back. I never did it because I'm not wired that way. But our CG guys would do it back in the day at Toonami. It was just like the normal thing. It was like, oh yeah, man, I gotta get down to the deadline till it's due and really stay all night and keep an eye on it. Like it was just part of the thinking back then. Now you would never see anyone do it now, not commonly.
Yeah. Do you think there was a shift in that kind of like work culture from back in the 90s to now? Like, did it feel a little more scrappy and kind of we're all in this together, or you know what I mean? Like, was there sort of this feeling of or has that changed at all?
It was both. I mean, it was both. I say both meaning it was good and bad. Right. There was like, yes, there was a lot of freedom. It was very scrappy. It was definitely more like, it just felt like the possibilities were endless. Right. And but at the same time, there was way more of room to be abused by your coworkers in terms of women being hit on or made to feel uncomfortable in the workplace, or people being berated and called names, or like it definitely was an unhealthier place to work in a lot of ways, and then in a lot of other ways it was a better place to work because it was more free and more wild, and you could kind of felt like you were making some exciting things, and there were a lot of possibilities. So it was both, and now it's more settled, and I think certainly more safe. It's just also a little bit more of a business and a little bit less of like a pure joy of creating kind of thing. So it was a trade-off, and I would not really blame anybody for saying it was one way or the other, because it was everything.
Yeah. I mean, that's just kind of something I think we've been witnessing just in America's history. It's like things were better for this group of people,
right?
But right. And it was really bad for everyone else. And then when that group of people complains that things are different, and it's not like how it used to be. It's like, but it's like much better for everyone else. So it's I can see how that applies to animation as well.
I mean, it definitely does.
We had a question from @AmbientVirus. How much longer do you think TV can hold out given the decline in ratings over the years? And do you think at some point streaming ratings will be made public similar to Nielsen ratings?
No, streaming ratings will never be made public. When we all collectively decided to accept Netflix not sharing their data or only sharing it extremely selectively, that is over now. There will never be public sharing of that information again, unless it is to the benefit of the company sharing it.
Right.
Honestly, they were just the smartest people. I mean, they were just smarter. They were like, why the fuck should we tell anybody? What do they know? We'll just tell them whatever we want and they'll just shut the fuck up. And guess what? Everyone just happily agreed to it. So, I mean, that's why they shut down Box Office Mojo, because the studios were like, we don't want everybody knowing how much money a movie made. Now nobody knows. Now it's all just guesswork, because that fog of war is beneficial to the company. It's not beneficial to them to have full transparency.
Sure.
Do you think maybe because we've seen with Facebook now, Metaverse, that the governments are kind of trying to crack down on that? Do you feel like there could be a possibility in like the future that maybe the government could be like, okay, like you guys are producing a lot of media, it is influencing culture to some extent, we want to keep an eye on that, and we have to share numbers or whatever? Like, I mean,
maybe a different government, but not our government.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I don't think so. I think that ship has sailed. And I also think that, look, America's run by corporations, and I mean that in the purest sense of the word. Run, literally, our government, everything is run by corporations.
Yep.
So anything that doesn't benefit corporations, probably not going to happen. And Amazon or Netflix was just first to figure out, why should we share this data with people? Why should we pay a company like Nielsen to have a system that we all buy into that doesn't necessarily benefit us, when we can just say whatever we want? And as far as whether or not broadcast networks are going to survive, I mean, I really don't know. I know that there's been an incredibly steep drop off as more and more people have gotten into streaming, and more kids grow up watching YouTube and Twitch and then move into Netflix and Amazon and never. I mean, why would you interact with a commercial and you can't control when you're watching it, rewinding or fast forwarding? Like
Right.
that's a live stream. Television is a live stream. Now people only want to watch live streams when it's music, live event, or like a band or something that they can't get, that just isn't the same if it's not live.
Right.
So I think television will survive. I mean, the way people say CDs are dead, they still sell millions of dollars worth of CDs every year. So to some degree, things like vinyl's dead, CDs are dead. No one buys digital music anymore. Those are fallacies created by the people that want you to do whatever the new thing is.
Yeah.
There's plenty of people buying CDs. There's plenty of people buying vinyl. There's plenty of people. It's just not anywhere near the industry it used to be. So I don't think television is ever going to be the same. I don't think it's ever going to be what it was, but I think it'll survive in some form for sure. There's still going to be money to be made. And as long as there's money to be made, there will be television.
I just don't still listen to the radio. Like, I guess.
Right. Who are you? What is that? What's radio?
In the car?
Is that like Spotify?
No, like, okay, for real, just sidebar. Every time, because I Uber a lot, because I don't drive, and I'm telling you, 70% of the time, it's not Spotify.
Yeah.
It's,
it's radio.
K Earth 101.
But I don't think networks can compete with streamers now. I think we're having a very hard time, and I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. But I still don't think networks are going to disappear. I just think it's going to be a different thing. They'll have they'll be operating at a different scale. And luckily, I happen to work for one of the few corporations that has a bunch of networks and a streaming service all bundled together that can all kind of help each other. So if that happens, then I don't think there's any reason for Adult Swim, for instance, to go anywhere.
Yeah.
Because we'll share our shows with HBO Max and vice versa.
Yeah.
That's my hope.
Yeah.
That's also my hope, because
I
have HBO Max.
Yeah, but ratings aren't coming back. Back.
Yeah. We had a lot of various questions about HBO Max, and I think I'm going to try to just sum them all up with like, how has that affected your job and having this specific streaming platform that is dedicated for Warner Brothers stuff? Has that made things easier, or has it kind of bottlenecked things at all, or what's your take on that?
It hasn't bottlenecked anything. I mean, it's a company priority, obviously, because they're trying to build a service that competes with Netflix and Disney, which they're largely doing.
Yeah.
But so obviously that's going to be the company's, as a whole, the whole company's priority in terms of developing new content and money. Like, that's got to be. And that, I don't think there's anyone at the company who doesn't go, yeah, well, that makes sense. Like, as far as whether it's made things easier, it has in some ways. I mean, look, we got a bunch of DC movies and shows on the air in the last couple of years. We never would have had that if there wasn't a new sort of spirit of cooperation at the company, where we're all recognizing, like, look, if a DC movie does well and then it goes to the service and does well, and then there's a series from the animation group that does well, like, that benefits all of us. So let's all work together and support each other. We never did that before. It was very siloed. So for me, I think it's actually great that HBO Max is here, because we all feel like finally our company is doing the thing we wish they would have done 5 to 10 years ago, which is create a streaming service to compete with Netflix and Disney and Amazon, because Warner Brothers has so much great IP that some of the best in the world. So, a lot of us internally were like, why don't we have a streaming service yet? So all of us are kind of relieved. And in fact, my current job is making stuff for HBO Max, making stuff for Warner Brothers Animation, making stuff for Adult Swim. So I now work for all of those entities, and never has it felt more like we're all sort of rowing in the same direction. I'm actually thrilled with it.
Yeah. Are you guys like open to original IP still, or are you trying to largely focus on existing licenses?
It's both. I mean, I think it'd be stupid if you look at what literally the whole industry is doing, from Netflix to Disney to, obviously IP is the current war of the future, it really is. But I think it'd be stupid not to develop all the rich IP that's at Warner Brothers, but at the same time there is a commitment to do original stuff for sure. Like, Cartoon Network will always focus on original stuff. That's just and so will Adult Swim for the most part. Now there are still opportunities if someone's gonna say, "Do you want to do a Lord of the Rings movie?" I'm not gonna say no.
Right. You don't say no.
Right. But at the same time, I do think there will always be a need for original. I think actually you're gonna see us doing it way more than like Disney.
Oh yeah.
Disney's very, very devoted into mining their IP and keeping people from birth to death in their ecosystem.
Yeah.
And they're very, very good at it. That's like their specialty.
Yeah.
We're not trying to do that necessarily. And that's why people bag on like DC movies and stuff. I actually love the DC movies, and I don't love them all, meaning they're all good, because some of them are absolute garbage.
Yeah.
But I love that they are all totally different takes, that they give the movie to the reins of the creator and they let them have their vision. And maybe their vision isn't a vision I like, but it is a real vision. It's not like a content plan as set forth on a piece of paper by a company, which Marvel's movies are never terrible, and they're almost never great. They're always at a baseline of like, pretty fun. Yeah, pretty fun. DC's movies are at least trying for something, so where even if you think they're garbage, like it was somebody really believed
they're swinging, man. Yeah, they're not gonna.
And so I just like that. I think it's chaotic for sure, but like I really like that it's like people's visions being doubled down on. To me, that's like what it's all about. Like that's what I do. So yeah, maybe that vision isn't going to work out, but at least it wasn't some vanilla garbage nobody's going to remember in a year. Like I just, that's maybe my personal take,
It really does shine. Like I've been watching Peacemaker recently. That was like, I think the finale is premiering next week. And it's really fun because you're like, oh, I feel like I'm watching, okay, it's an IP, but I feel like I'm watching something that's more personal, because it's like, oh, I don't know exactly when the next beat is gonna land, or like the act structure is a little bit more flexible, so you're kind of like a little bit more on your toes because you're not in that like perfectly like
plotted out
roller coaster where exactly which what is coming when. Anyway,
and I don't think I think you can make great movies in either scenario, but it's like when you look at it's not a superhero, but like look at Macbeth, like the new Macbeth that just came out, that was Joel Coen's or Ethan Coen's Macbeth. Macbeth has been told thousands of times over the years. There are tons and tons of different versions of Macbeth. Yet that version of Macbeth obviously was a personal statement by the artist who made it. So you can certainly tell personal stories even within archetypal characters like Batman and Superman. You can tell amazingly personal stories if you're allowed to. If you're not allowed to, or if you're being told, well, it has to fit into this larger thing, if you push it too much in one direction, it doesn't slot in with the larger vision, then that's where I think it can get flattened.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about your role with music, but I wanted to dig into that a little bit more. What was sort of the inception for like the Adult Swim singles program and all the work you've done with various hip hop artists like Killer Mike and etc.?
That was basically, so the music thing started with Toonami and kept going as we reached out to different artists. Then I started doing Adult Swim on air. I started reaching out to more artists because we needed music for our air. So we started having all these great relationships with artists, and then that led to the Danger Doom album. And it was really after that we were like, well, we can do these music projects that people like. So I had this idea of, it was actually one of the people who worked at the label with me, Amantha Walden. She was like, we want to do a weekly singles series, but they wanted to do it for sale, like sell songs. And I was like, well, I'm into that, but like, let's do it as a free giveaway and let's get a sponsor to pay for it. And that way we give money to the artists. They get a little bit of exposure. We get a little bit of cool added to us, and we're promoting these artists. So again, it was like my philosophy of pay the artist, promote them somewhat, don't own the track, let them own the track, and just use our platform to push them out there. And hopefully more people hear their music and go, wow, Adult Swim brought me that cool thing. Adult Swim's cool. That's it. Very simple formula. So it did really well, and it just led to us doing singles for like 11 years or 10 years, however long we did singles for, and hundreds of songs and hundreds of artists. And through all of those different relationships, you start finding people that are simpatico, like Flying Lotus or like Killer Mike and LP. And then the Killer Mike and LP thing was literally just, it was like, I had done some stuff with Killer Mike. We had gotten along really well. He did a song for the Frisky Dingo. He did a song for the Aqua Teen Hunger Force movie. And then he was the voice of our Boondocks promos for season 3. And he came to me and he was. And he just came to me and said, hey man, I really like working with you guys, and I know that I could make a record with you that's just total creative freedom and wouldn't sound like anything else. And I want you to help produce the record with me because I know I love the way you think, and I just know you have a great ear for beats. And I said, cool. So then we started talking about like, what are your influences? Like, what kind of record do you want to make that you haven't made yet? And he said, I want to make my America's Most Wanted. I want to make my Ice Cube album. And my favorite rap album is Ice Cube's Death Certificate. And I said, well, that's funny because Death Certificate, which is the one that came out right after America's Most Wanted, is my favorite rap record. And he was like, well, shit. So I said, if you want America's Most Wanted, that's like Bomb Squad production. And there's only one artist I know right now who's making music that's similar to Bomb Squad production, and that's LP. Have you heard of this guy, LP? And he had heard of him, but he hadn't heard any of his music. So I played a bunch of his music, and he was like, yo, this is crazy. And I said, I'll reach out to him. So L had heard of Mike. He kept up on all Southern rap, and he was like, yeah, I'll write some beats for him. Fuck it.
Yeah.
And
that's magic.
Then,
that was just magic.
Yeah, they just started vibing, and they basically met, and literally they like, it was like watching two people fall in love. They like literally fell in love right when they met, and they immediately vibed. And when L left and flew back to New York, Mike called me and was like, he's got to do the whole album. And I was like, he's doing his own album. He doesn't have time to do the whole album. And Mike was like, fuck that. We're going to bother him until he just does it. And I was like, okay, L can be pretty prickly, but okay. And so we just took turns bothering L, literally bugging the shit out of him until he said, fine, I'll do the whole album. Damn it. To do my album. Now I got to do this album, you know, and we flew Killer Mike up to New York and had some sessions there. And then we flew him through L back to Atlanta. So it was like 3 sessions total to get the album knocked down. And then L took a couple weeks to mix it, and we mastered it in Atlanta and released it. And it did well. It didn't do amazingly well, but it did fine, and it got really good reviews. And they went on tour to support L's album, which came out the day before, and his album. And I believe L was opening for Mike. And they had one song on the album that they did together. It was basically a pre-Run the Jewels song before Run the Jewels, where L rapped and Mike rapped, and it was L's beat. And they had such a fun time on yeah, exactly. And they had such a fun time on tour that they called me and they were like, yeah, we think we're going to just record a whole another album together, but we're going to be like a group, like an old school rap group. And I was in Barcelona filming something for Primavera Festival, and Mike was there performing, and I was recording Mike, and we were hanging out, and he was like, yo, I keep telling L we got to call ourselves Run the Jewels. L thinks he doesn't like the name. I keep telling him, man. And they form Run the Jewels. They record their first album, and while they told me they're recording it, I said, well, you know what? We want to license that album right now before it's even out. So I'm going to give you money right now you can use to make the record. And when you're done with it, all you have to do is let us use the music on air. You can still do whatever you want with it. And so for all 4 Run the Jewels albums, so when they went to do the second one, they said, we're going to do another one. And I said, let's do the same deal. I'll give you X amount of money ahead of time.
Super smart. Huh.
So we kind of funded the albums, you know, as they came out. So that just led to so many amazing creative things that happened. But again, it was because I was given the freedom and the runway to do the singles program. And I got to do it for a long time and build relationships that slowly led to better things that led to this opportunity. And it was because I was given that runway, and I was able to form a relationship with Mike and L that led to that point.
Yeah. Taking advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah.
Those little strings.
But that's how all that music stuff happened, was really because we just wanted Adult Swim to sound different from everything else. And we wanted to make sure that our music stood out. Yeah. And so the bump editors and writers pick the songs, and I would go out, and they would too find some music, and I would go out and make deals with labels and find artists and give them artists, and they would sometimes write a bump promoting somebody's album in exchange for us getting to use the music, you know. So it was like, it just was a very organic thing, and it was all based in Adult Swim wanting to feel different than any other network.
Yeah, I love everything those two have done. I was listening to rap music yesterday at the gym. It's a very good working out album.
It is. Big high energy.
Big
high
Beast
energy.
comes on, man, and I'm lifting heavy.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about Creative Block and how it feels for you and how you sort of cope with it.
Okay, so this is the weird thing. I know the show's called Creative
That's fine.
Block.
That's just a clever name.
I don't really get Creative Block.
Okay.
Nice.
I have friends that have gotten it. I have coworkers and artists, friends that I've worked with. I can tell you the closest thing I have to Creative Block is when I'm trying to work on an idea and I'm not happy with the result. So I'm one of those people that when I write something or when I come up with an idea, usually what I came up with very quickly, the first blush thing is the thing I feel is the best. The more I overthink it, the more I water it down. Usually my first non-second guessed idea is my best idea, right? And so as a result, if I do that and I still think it's not working, instead of trying to work it until I feel it works, I just walk away. I just walk away and come back a day or two later. And in some cases I'm not even thinking about it. I just put it away. And then I come back and re-experience it and see if it makes sense. And sometimes I come back and go, what is this garbage? And just delete it. And sometimes I go, oh, this is fine. Why was I second guessing it? And then sometimes I go, oh, you know what I needed this. Or I'll say, you know what, I want to share this with a friend and see what they think and get their opinion, you know. But like, that's as close as I get. I pretty much have ideas every day, all day, and always have my whole life. I've never I will sometimes have I'll have a hard time figuring out how to get from my idea to the reality, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
Especially when like drawing, you know, one thing I noticed when I went to art school before I moved over to becoming a film major, I started as an illustration major.
Oh, okay.
And I'll never forget looking at the person next to me and I was like, this person is an absolute fucking moron and their art is 10 times better than mine will ever be. They don't have a thought in their head and they'll be a better artist than I am for the rest of their life. Like no doubt in my mind. And I remember thinking, you know what? I'm second guessing every line I put on paper and it's warping the image I have. The perfect image I have in my head is not translating to paper because I have A, my skill isn't developed enough, and B, I'm second guessing everything I'm doing and changing it. And this person next to me may be a moron, but the idea is forming in their head and they're not second guessing themselves. They have a channel from their brain to their hand and they're able to just realize that vision of what they're trying to draw. And I couldn't get there. And I was like, that for me was a revelation. It was like, I shouldn't do this. I can draw. I'm never going to be as good as a lot of the people in this room because they have something I don't, you know? And that's when I moved over to film and video.
Yeah.
And obviously that decision worked out for me. But I still draw and I still can draw. But my art, like anything else, is always better when I'm just doodling and not thinking about it. I have a whole notebook filled with weird ass doodles of things. And there's some good little drawings in there. And then there's a bunch of garbage. And I just don't.
As it should be.
I'm just,
yeah.
And I'm just barfing out what comes out of me, you know?
That's what V is good at.
Generally, yeah, but she's actually good.
Look at all this.
But that's like, but that's like, I think that's for me the closest thing to creative block is like when you know you've hit a wall, whatever that wall is. My only advice I know works for me is sometimes you just need to put things down and go live your life and come back and re-engage with whatever you were working on. And oftentimes the solution will present itself after that.
It sure does. Yeah, it's something that a lot of people have said, and it's probably the most common solution, I would say.
And I think the hardest part with the solution is that, like, you have to trust that it will come to you. Because it's happened to me a couple of times where I'm like working through a scene and I'm like, I can't get it. And I'm like, well, I should just make lunch. But my first instinct is always like, no, work through until it's done. And sometimes I'm like hungry enough that I'm like, okay, I'll go eat lunch.
You gotta do
and
but then I get the idea, and I'm like, well, thanks, and it's like, well, if I anyway, it's, you got to trust that it will come to you, and it's like, faith is hard,
It is.
I mean, a lot of my best ideas have come to me while I'm in the shower.
I was gonna say the shower, like everything I've ever, any like spark of inspiration I've ever had is in the shower. I don't know what it is.
You know why? It's because you don't have a phone in the shower.
It's not that.
I mean, this is even before cell phones for me. Like, I don't know why. I mean, I take a 15-minute shower on average. I'm not in there all the time, but like, I thought of The Intruder while I was in the shower.
Hell yeah.
I mean, like,
oh wow,
a lot of ideas I've had just are like, hey, what if, I don't even have my coffee, I'm just in the shower, I don't know why.
I shower at night. I'm a night shower. But my theory is that it's like, you're blocked off from any outside, and it's not even necessarily phones, like you said. It's just like you're blocked out from anything outside. It's white noise. It's repetitive motion. That sounds dirty, but it's just like things that you've already done. It's like fucking cleaning your hair, whatever. It's like you don't have to think, but your body's moving, your brain's moving, and like and
you're staring at tiles.
You're staring at
like
nothing.
You're staring at tiles.
Yeah.
So it is a place where your brain goes inward a little bit.
I think I also personally, I think I learned that unblocking a creativity just from video games, because it's a similar set of you're trying to solve a problem, you're on some boss that's like giving you a hard fucking time, and I used to try to force it, and then I realized it's like, it's 1 a.m. I need to walk away from this, and then the next morning I knock it out in one go, and it's like,
totally, I've done that many times. Or like a puzzle you're trying to solve in a game, trying to figure out how to get up somewhere, and you're like, oh duh, it was this little knob I didn't see before.
That's so interesting too, because like the job that I'm currently doing is a CG. We're like boarding in Blender basically, so I had to learn the software. And I mean, I had a little bit of CG training from college, but learning this was really like, okay, like we're really gonna go deep into the software. And we were fortunate enough that we were trained on the job, and it was exactly what you're talking about. It's like there were days at the beginning of training I was like, I'm never gonna get this, I'm never gonna be ready for production. But every time I went to sleep, the next day I'm like, whoa, shit, I can actually run through the scene. I can click there in all these little boxes. I remember where everything is. It's just like this really interesting way the brain works. I think when you sleep is like really when it gets burned into your neurons or whatever. But you're
learning, but you're learning like
patterns.
You're learning your own ideas.
Yeah, that's true. Interesting. One last thing that we'll ask you is just, what are your goals for the future? What kind of stuff do you hope to accomplish in the years to come?
I just want to keep being allowed to make fun stuff. I don't have a specific goal in mind. I rarely work that way. And if I did, for me, being able to do a Lord of the Rings film
nice
is I can die tomorrow,
That's it.
Like the only other thing I would want to maybe work on one day that I never have is Star Wars, because it was so formulative for me. I mean, I helped launch Clone Wars, so I did meet with Lucas. I did work on Star Wars, but not on the actual storytelling. And if there was one more bridge to cross, that would be the one thing. But after Lord of the Rings, it's been such a formative part of my life for so long that, like, honestly, that's the pinnacle for me. I don't know how I could do anything that would matter as much to me as this movie does. And even just being, I mean, we're very early in, but even so far, just in the writing and everything else, it's been one of the most creatively rich experiences I've ever had. So for me, I honestly am at the point where there's not much I feel like I need to prove, and I just want to keep making fun stuff for as long as I can and collaborating with people, and I'm not really going to worry about anything else.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I've said it a few times, but I'll say it again. Like, the work you've done has been huge. It's been formative for many, many people. Like, just even having the wherewithal to like get fully coolly over to the States, like that was such a huge moment for me. Like, when that first aired, that blew me away, and like is the reason why I got into animation. Like, I started doing Flash cartoons. I was just ripping off scenes from Fully Kool-Aid, just like trying to just like learn how to think like those guys, and all the music work and everything, and just keep doing what you're doing, because you clearly are like plugged into some, I don't know, some cosmic force that knows you know, what is appealing and what people will connect with, and like it's really, really important. I think that people like you, people that are doing that work on the back end, it wouldn't happen. You know, creatives can't exist on their own. They just can't. Like, it's just it's a business. It's a capitalist ass business, and you need those people. You need people like you that can bridge that gap between like the executive, you know, at Turner or whatever, and the artists. Like, it's so.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Really thank you. That's I was really excited to chat with you, and you said so many insightful things.
Yeah, same here.
Thank you. Anything else you want to mention? Anything you want to plug while you're on the show?
No, I mean, watch Toonami. We have originals now, and it's on every Saturday night at midnight. So thank you to everybody that has watched or watched for 5 minutes or 25 years. And I hope that you watch all the way through our 25th anniversary in March. And we appreciate all of you, each and every one.
25th anniversary. That's amazing.
I know. It's crazy.
Well, that's the end of this creative block. Jason, thanks so much for being our guest and sharing your story.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And thanks to your listeners. Follow us on Twitter. It's at Creative Block, creative without the vowels, where we ask for drawing prompts and questions to ask your guests. Huge thanks to our editor, Clemens, for editing the podcast, and Malik for helping us produce the show.
Malik was really excited about having you on as well, by the way, our producer. It was,
nice.
Yeah, we were geeking out. If you love our show, support us on Patreon. Becoming a patron gets you early access to interviews as well as bonus episodes. Click the link in the description of this episode. I've been your host, Gene.
And I was V, keeping creative, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.